people would build generating stations and then just run wires to their customers. So you'd have a telephone pole with, dozens, if not hundreds of wires. And to get away from that and to enhance the economic output for the country as a whole, the utility structure was created originally in Chicago. And so instead of having, hundreds of wires on a pole, you'd have one. And that would feed every single house or every single farm or every single factory on that same line. Our ability to create utilities and to regulate them back at that time in particular, when we needed to invest and grow, both how much generation we had and where we were delivering power, was really instrumental in allowing the grid to become as complex as it is today.
The world of energy and the technology shaping it. I'm Josh Tate, and this is Between Two Turbines. Powered by NERC. Alan, welcome back to the show.
I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, well, today what I wanted to do was take kind of a brief history of how we got here, how the grid became the grid, the way we know it now. It seems like a lot of things are marked by, problems along the way, and it's solving those problems. And now we're at a very complex system. I've heard some people say it's the largest machine in the entire world.
Mm-hmm. Largest and most complex.
Yeah. And so I think, especially for me, and for NACE and for people related to NACE, there's a lot to kind of understand. I wanted to talk through in broad strokes where we came from, where we're at today. And so going back, way back in time, we're talking Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla. And, back in the day, we really didn't understand the possibilities. And I almost think if they could see where we're at now, they may think it's utopian in a lot of ways. And just light, in and of itself was such a big problem. We lived in darkness for most of human history, and now we can get a light anywhere. Yep. And so going back to, those early days, that first generating station in New York City, it only powered 85 people. Yep. And it was on DC power. Yep. So starting out, I'd like to hear your commentary on where we were at on the DC AC side. There's kind of this war going on. And so, Edison, more of a businessman than Tesla. It seems like he was more focused on the physics, the science of it. Yep. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, those, back in the late 1800s when kind of we started with central generating plants were an interesting time. And one of the things I think about a lot is that, of course, Edison had the first one, that Pearl Street station, which I think you alluded to, and it powered 80 homes. And
Proof of concept.
And he just ran wires to those homes. So there were some telephone or telegraph poles at the time, and he just put wires on those and ran them to his customers. Yeah. And then as other folks saw, hey, that's a way I could make money, they built their plants, right, and then ran wires to their customers' homes.
Yeah, so like London, Chicago, some of these bigger cities, but still it was just the city center. Yeah. Maybe kind of the elite class that got access to it, or some of these businesses like JP Morgan, some of these others. We've come a long way. Yeah. It's scaled up, and you look at the Chicago World's Fair. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the first place that I think Westinghouse and Tesla kind of showed out, really. Yep. And looking back at some of these old images, you can see them. It's like it looks modern. Yep. In a sense, but it's the 1800s, and I could imagine what I've heard is some reports people would weep when they got there. Is they've just never seen such a large area just being fully lit.
Fully lit, yes.
And I think when we think about electricity, initially the first thought was light. Yeah. How do we get light? How do we become productive in dark hours? Yep. And so it's changed our civilization dramatically. Not only with modern tech, but just the ability to write and do things. By candlelight, you'd have to have the money to, for gas lamps or for candles, et cetera. But now, especially with like LEDs, we're not using that much electricity to get this light that's such a major utility to us.
Yep.
Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, the world would not be what the world is today without electricity, and certainly, our country went through significant investment, kind of from the early 1900s, through the 1940s to get electricity all across the country. There was a rural electrification effort in the 30s that allowed us to bring power into the non-city centers. And of course, it was a public works type project, and it was started during the Great Depression when we needed to find jobs for people. But it was also, I think, very wise of our policymakers at the time to make that investment, and to create the opportunity for power to be all across the U.S. And one of the interesting things I think about is the utility structure that was created. I was mentioning earlier that people would build generating stations and then just run wires to their customers. So you'd have a telephone pole with dozens, if not hundreds, of wires. And to get away from that and to enhance the economic output for the country as a whole, the utility structure was created originally in Chicago. And so what that allowed for was a utility would have a monopoly in a certain geographical region, but they'd have a capped amount of profit that they could make. And so instead of having, hundreds of poles or hundreds of wires on a pole, you'd have one, and that would feed every single house or every single farm or every single factory on that same line. And so our ability to create utilities and to regulate them back at that time in particular, when we needed to invest and grow, both how much generation we had and where we were delivering power, was really instrumental in allowing the grid to become as complex as it is today.
Yeah. And a lot of, at the time, these were all separate, generating stations. They didn't have an idea of actually interconnecting any
Correct.
of this.
Yep.
And from my understanding, a lot from the 30s, 40s, those transmission lines we still are using.
Yes.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's
Almost
amazing and also a little scary.
Yeah.
Some of those lines, they need to be upgraded. We've had issues, particularly in the West with forest fires, with some of the, let's call them 100-year-old, 80-year-old lines that, despite best efforts, haven't maybe been as maintained as well as they could have been. And so, we did that investment then. There's probably more investment that we need to do to both upgrade the grid today and to enhance it, because we need a lot more energy now than we ever have, and just leveraging those old lines built between the 1930s and let's call it the 1970s,
right,
isn't going to get us where we need to be.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of it was just we were solving problems as we went.
Yep.
And, kind of going back to that era, Tesla, Westinghouse working together, really showing that AC as a proof of concept was going to work.
Yep.
And it made sense as the major way to transmit energy, electricity around, the United States and beyond.
Yeah.
And from there, they made this first generating station, Niagara Falls, 11 megawatts.
Huge.
And even I saw they advertised it as 15,000 horsepower.
Yep.
And so, which, you look at some of these modern, hydroelectric, like in China, what is it, 23,000 megawatts, something like
exactly,
that.
Yeah.
So it pales in comparison, but it was this proof of concept, and they said, and this was all privately invested.
Funded, yes.
It was not even, the government wasn't ready to invest in that. And so this project was that proof of concept. And from there, it just, the station started to proliferate around the country.
Yep.
And I mean, that process of connecting the grid, we started realizing we needed these turbines to be spinning at the same rate.
Yep.
Tell me about some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean so in those early days, let's call them early 1900s up through the 40s, there wasn't really power systems as a course of study didn't really exist. And so a lot of the learnings came out of industrial applications where they would have a lot of motors on a site, and they would see frequency imbalances or other things that were happening within the factory itself. And we took those learnings and said, okay, what if you spread that across a geographical area that's got 100 generators and 10,000 interconnection points and that kind of stuff. And that's a lot of where the theory around power systems came from. And so there, some of there's physical geographical challenges, we call it the grid, but there's really 4 separate grids in North America. There's the Eastern and Western, separated basically by the Rockies. Texas is a separate grid because they wanted to regulate themselves without any federal oversight. And then Quebec, similarly in Canada, wanted to have a separate grid for the same reason. So they didn't have federal oversight from the Canadian side. And so a lot of these concepts like slowly came together, and the benefits of being interconnected with your neighbor utility outweighed the cost
of the regulation
for it. And so, one of the things that I was heavily involved in here at NACE was our NERC team, and NERC originally came out in the 60s after an outage that occurred in the 60s, and it was voluntary. And it was only for utilities.
We started to see the complexity was growing too fast. There were problems that were possible that we didn't quite realize. And as we started interconnecting, it became even more complicated. Right.
Nobody expected you could lose 20, 30, 40 million people from a single event.
Right.
Until it happened.
Yeah. And so, going back to when we first started creating these lines all across the U.S., and to the first really major publicly funded, looking at the hydroelectric, for instance, the Hoover Dam or Grand Coulee Dam, massive projects. And this is, right around World War II, this type of thing. The scale of the Hoover Dam being at, 1,300 megawatts. And looking at Niagara Falls at 11 megawatts. Obviously, that's been shut down. They have a more modern version now, but it's amazing. I would imagine at the time 1,300 megawatts was kind of unthinkable. The amount of power would have been just shocking.
Power of the whole West Coast or something. The thinking was it was.
And do we really have LA or some of these cities the way that we do without that power generation, that cheap energy flowing in? And the same goes for Seattle. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I mean, I think the ability to have the power or the energy needed to manufacture, to create movies, you're talking about LA, is critical to the growth of these types of cities in the West in particular. One of the big challenges in the West is kind of the distance from generation to where the population centers are. And so many of the plants were built like you mentioned Grand Coulee and the Hoover Dam. When those were built, there was very, very little population in those areas. And so we had these very long transmission lines to get it to the coasts, basically, where the population was growing. And even later into the 60s, 70s, 80s, coal plants were being built, let's call it in the Mountain West. And with the same idea, move that power to the coast, particularly to California, as its population was booming.
And outside of these hydroelectric, primarily these generating stations were coal powered. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean coal. Probably from the 50s through the 90s into the early 2000s
Right.
was our primary generating source as a country as a whole.
And I think post World War II, we started looking at kind of this nuclear era of generating. Something I find interesting about the nuclear power generation is they act similarly to like a coal or a natural gas plant in that they're always on.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, why didn't we invest more? It seems like, I look at like France, they're primarily powered by nuclear.
80% nuclear in France,
And I realize a lot of the lead times for construction on these types of plants could be 10 years or, and whereas putting natural gas, especially after, the advent of fracking and just the cost reduction.
Yep.
So what's your thought there? I mean, the transition, we had these major hydroelectric dams. Geographically, there's not really other locations to build projects of that scale.
Correct.
And so, we built out coal, got to about the 90s, 2000s, and then kind of that breakthrough of fracking kind of came into place. But what's your thought on that timeline?
Yeah, I mean, specific to nuclear, I think it's a very abundant energy source that I wish there was more of domestically here in the U.S. and all across North America. I think that the biggest challenge with nuclear is the fear. A catastrophic event like a Chernobyl, and then there was also 3 Mile Island.
Sure.
It scared the public. We were talking about, kind of Hollywood before, there were movies that the China syndrome and others that really scared the public even more. And so public support for nuclear significantly eroded by the mid 80s, let's call it 85, 86 timeframe. And so while there were dozens of additional units that had been planned to be built, including NACE was originally founded to operate 6 plants that were going to be built in Washington State, of which only 1 got completed. That public outcry really just shut down the industry. In fact, there was a plant in California in the Sacramento area that got funded, built, started up, and then there was a vote. The public decided to shut it down after only 1 year of operation. So it's $1 billion investment just lost.
Somewhat of human nature, maybe.
Yep.
So, you had mentioned the Northeast blackout, 30 million without power. At the time, I think that was 30% of the population. It was a massive
the one in
swath.
the 60s.
Right. Which eventually, created NERC.
Yep.
What did they really even have a concept of that being a possibility at the time? I mean, it seems like it's generally a domino effect that they don't account for. It's like, well, we have these 3 things in place, but if they all go offline, then you could end up with a major blackout like that.
Right.
And
I mean, I would say that you may have had some PhDs at universities saying, hey, watch out, this might happen, but generally speaking, kind of within the industry, there wasn't a concept that you could have such a large cascading event.
Yeah.
But even then,
seeing is believing.
Yeah, exactly. Even then, even after that happened, it was still, one, at that time in the mid 60s, everything was a utility. There weren't kind of IPPs like we know them today, and where NACE primarily works. But it still was. It was best practices sharing. It wasn't a required thing. It was just, hey, you utilities, you should work together better and coordinate. Make sure that your relays are set properly, et cetera, et cetera. It was the next blackout in 2001 where we lost 50 million people. Similar area of the grid. Where Congress finally said, okay, this is going to be required.
Right.
We're not just going to say you should.
So it went from just, advice to regulation.
Yes, exactly.
And
with stiff penalties if you don't do it.
Right. Because the potential, negative outcomes become so much greater as it expands. Like we said, the largest machine in the world.
Yep.
So, you mentioned 2003, 55 million without power.
Yep.
That really solidified what NERC is doing.
Yep.
Sort of weave in the story of NACE, because we did come about in the 80s, but your hand in what we're doing with NERC was a big part of that. So I'm curious to hear your story on that.
Yeah. You mentioned, NACE started in 1980. We did our first O&M contract in 1987. And the reason that a company like NACE could exist was because the market was changing. So I mentioned in the 60s, it was all utilities. In the 70s, there was an act through Congress passed called PURPA that allowed power plants that supplied steam to some kind of process industry to be built with private money. It no longer needed to be regulated by the utility. And actually, this PURPA regulation required the utility to purchase the power from those plants. So it started to just kind of crack the door a little bit on deregulation. And so that's what created the opportunity for NACE to exist as an O&M company. And so, there were few IPPs when we started doing that work in the mid 80s, and more of them over time. In particular, starting in about 1996 through 2002, there was a huge boom. There was a large demand growth expected, just like we're seeing today. And so lots and lots of plants were being built, and it was being built with private money. And so that really gave NACE the opportunity to grow significantly. You mentioned NERC and the regulations associated with the 2003 blackout. One of the areas that NACE really started diving into when those regulations became enforceable was the NERC space, because there weren't people that had expertise in that space, particularly related to independent power producers. And so we created a team that we created program documents and consulting to support our own fleet. And then we thought, hey, this is something that the rest of the industry needs as well. And so we've grown that business over the years to what it is today.
Yeah. Going back to when NACE really entered the picture, how much has changed since then to now? In the 80s, there was kind of slowdown of what we're doing with nuclear, moving more, back towards coal. And then really the 90s and 2000s kind of things shook up there.
Yep.
So yeah, tell me about how has NACE been involved in that? What's been our thing along the way?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, or as we've discussed, the change from kind of coal to gas happened because one, environmental regulations, two, gas was a relatively cheap and stable fuel source. And so those plants, because they were cheaper and easier to build, drove more private money into the space. And so we've grown, not that we haven't operated every type of technology except nuclear, but we've grown significantly from the growth in gas. And so that has been probably the primary type of plants that NACE has operated over the decades. I think, we operate 250 plants today, probably 150 of them plus are gas-based, either combined cycle or simple cycle. So that's where we're very, very strong.
Yeah, and technologically, it wasn't until they found a way to extract that natural gas in the 90s, 2000s that it became so economically viable.
Yeah, you're talking about fracking.
Right.
Yeah, and the fracking revolution. And we found we could extract gas in other parts of the country, as opposed to just West Texas, for example, and Eastern New Mexico.
And my understanding was we were going primarily from importing to now we're primarily exporting.
Yep.
And so it's really changed our economic, in terms of energy production, in terms of the grid, how it's divided up has changed dramatically.
Yep.
And also the benefit of reduced CO2 emissions.
Yep.
So a lot's changed since then. And now getting into 2010s and modern day, renewables are kind of coming online, and they're much cheaper than they used to be. And so my understanding is now up to 90% of new energy being added to the grid is renewable.
Yep.
Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah. So kind of as you mentioned, wind and solar in particular, for decades were very expensive relative to the amount of power output that you got. And starting around 2010, 2015 timeframe, the cost for installation and operations and maintenance of those went down significantly. And so these days the cheapest form of generation is probably solar. The downside of solar, of course, is that the sun doesn't shine all the time, and we need electricity all the time. And so right now, in California and in Texas in particular, a lot of solar is being installed in conjunction with battery storage.
Right.
So that when the sun is shining, you can charge up your battery, and then when you need it, overnight, or at least during the periods when people are still using it into the evenings, you can discharge those batteries, and you don't have that huge drop off in generation capacity. So, NACE has played a role, and we've operated and done remote operation of solar, battery storage, wind.
Sure.
And particularly in wind, we've been in that space for over 20 years, even before it was as cost efficient as it is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there is this belief of like, hey, we just need to shut down all the coal plants. We need to shut down all the natural gas plants. And the reality is a little bit more nuanced than that. I think even as we add much more renewables to the grid, like you said, the gap, particularly on whether the wind is blowing or the sun is shining, needs to be filled by batteries. That technology is maturing still. Yep. So there's some investment. It seems like that's growing. The investment of new solar plants going in, many of them do have the battery technology.
Yep.
So there's a bit of a gap there still.
Yep.
And it's kind of a all hands on deck approach, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think last time we talked, I kind of mentioned I'm an all of the above person. I think we need it all. Mm-hmm. And I think that the economics will drive the economics of each geographical region within the North American grid will drive what type of generation makes the most sense there. You're not going to really want to install solar up in Alaska. It's not going to help you that much. Right. And so it's just finding the right solution for whatever the problem is in the area that you're in is really important. And I don't agree with we should shut down all the gas and coal-fired power plants. I think we need them, and I don't know how long we'll need them for, but it's at least a decade,
sure.
If not much longer than that. I'd love to see, we touched on nuclear before, and I think last time we talked, we also talked about nuclear. I'd love to see more nuclear come on, either whether it's small modular reactors or even the large, 1,500 megawatt type solutions that we already have implemented. I just think it's expensive to build, but it's a very low cost relative to how much output you get over the long term. And these plants now, many of them have been licensed for 80 years. So you may spend a couple $1 billion, but you get 80 years of very low cost, very stable generation. Right. And you only need to take an outage every 18 to 24 months. Wow. And otherwise they're just on the grid producing constantly.
Yeah. Always on.
Yeah.
And the benefits are massive. The initial investment, some of those time frames, some of the regulation involved, it gets more complicated. And when you look at the abundance of natural gas, when you look at the ability to create a generating station for natural gas, much easier.
Yep.
And then looking at the future is these data centers.
Yep.
They're 5% of what we're using on the grid currently, but we expect that to grow quite a bit. How much is that going to grow? Do we know?
Yeah, I mean, by 2035, the projections are that it'll triple. And so it could be up to 15% of the load growth. Now, one of the interesting things has been that because what's called the queues within these different market regions are so long that data center developers are deciding to do what's called behind the meter generation. They're just building power plants not connected to the grid in any way to power just the data centers.
Right.
And so
completely isolated.
That concept means that they might be able to build much, much faster now than kind of we've traditionally seen.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge still is getting turbines or getting reciprocating engines, whatever you want to use to power. It's sold out for 5 years.
Right.
If you were to order an H class or a G class machine right now from GE, Mitsubishi, Siemens, you wouldn't get it till 2031 at the soonest. And so
are we in a holding pattern right now?
We're just within NACE, we have our engineered performance team, and they're finding turbines around the world, unused or used turbines that we can bring and install quicker.
Right.
So we've found units that are 50 years old, that have been in layup for 30 years, and we're going to make them usable again and install those for our data center clients. So we're definitely not at a standstill, but we're not moving as fast as particularly the Googles and the Metas and the Amazons would like.
Yeah,
they're not used to waiting. They're used to spending money, and it just happens.
When you have that much money,
yeah, exactly.
You kind of there's a feeling you can just materialize what you
need.
And some of these things are just logistics. We can't just make a turbine appear out of thin air.
Right. And we're seeing customers or potential customers go to smaller and smaller units. So instead of installing one 500 megawatt combined cycle type of facility, they're buying 100 5 megawatt units. Now it's a maintenance nightmare, but you can get those units faster.
Right.
You can go down to Home Depot and grab a 500 kW generator right now.
Right.
You just need a lot of those to power a data center.
Yeah. Some might ask, well, why not invest in some of the renewables, like do a solar plant and battery storage and that sort of thing. And my understanding is may not be reliable as they need. It may not be economical as they desire. And I've heard a lot of talk around the small modular reactors. Maybe the branding gets a boost because there's not explicitly nuclear in the verbiage. Yes. So I wonder if that's maybe an element, maybe it being modular, being small, it feels like very contained.
Yeah.
Is that the future? Do you see we've broken ground on some? What is there? There's one in Wyoming. There's a couple others percolating around.
But there's one up at Idaho National Lab, I think, and they're installing one at one of the utilities up in Ontario. At the moment, and
some of them are up to 300 megawatts.
Yeah. I think
so
the one in
doesn't seem that small.
No, it's small relative to the traditional nuclear.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of potential there. As they've gotten larger, though, I worry that you're losing that modularization concept where you can just almost like a trailer home where you can just punch out a bunch of them and ship them to wherever you want.
At
300 megawatts, there's still a lot of customization that needs to be done during the construction phase. Whereas, maybe those smaller kind of, initially we were talking about 50 megawatt, you might be able to build those at a factory and ship them around the world.
Yeah.
So I do worry that we lose some of that modularization at these larger sizes. It's more attractive for people building them because obviously that larger power output. But I wonder about that piece of it. Because if you're doing 300 and you have to do all that customization, why not just go to the 1.2 to 1.5 gig? Traditional.
Yeah, and I saw, Microsoft they purchased the reactor of the 3 Mile Island.
They purchased the output of that to restart it. Yep.
So 2028 it's back online and
exactly 900 megawatts right there.
It seems sort of like a inflection point historically. Because it was a big moment that it got shut down in the first place, and historically speaking, the safeguards in place at the time did work the way we wanted them to.
Yes. It's just very scary.
Right. Which, obviously the worst case scenario is what we fear ultimately.
Right.
But
the Chernobyl, that's a worst case scenario.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's of course the argument of, well, what about the waste? What do we do with that? You know, and in my mind, I think of that as something that's, could be kicked down the road a bit. They're probably fine in their casks outside the facility
Right.
for now. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the complexity, stuff coming online the next 5 years, it seems like these small modular reactors will be a big part of these data centers, especially if they grow, triple in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
We're going to need a lot of power.
Yeah.
And the idea that we're going to be shutting down plants doesn't seem likely.
Yeah.
In the near term.
Yeah. I mean, the economics are still very challenging for coal plants.
Sure.
And I think that that's probably the biggest, like, we want that generation, but it costs twice as much to make a megawatt depending on where it is, what type of fuel, et cetera, et cetera. But, it can cost twice as much to make a megawatt at a coal plant than at a gas plant.
Right.
And that's where it gets hard to justify, whether you're at a utility and you're passing the cost off to your rate payers like you and I, or if you're private equity and you're looking at a return on your investment.
Right.
When you double the price per megawatt, it's just much fewer days you can run and make money.
Right.
And coal plants aren't good at sitting there cold iron,
right,
and starting up in a pinch. That's just not how they were built.
Yeah. Looking at the transmission lines, I think something that is not understood fully is if we do move a lot of our generation to renewables, we have to get that energy elsewhere. And a lot of times these are located in not very populous places.
Right.
And so that's a whole other challenge. Something we've talked about before.
Yep.
How does that play into all of this?
Yeah, I mean, where we have, particularly for wind generation, where the wind blows the hardest and the most consistently are in parts of the country that very few people live. And so, there's a 3,500 megawatt wind farm proposed in Wyoming. Well, Wyoming has a population of 500,000 people, 600,000 people, very, very few. And so we got to transmit that to places where people live, Texas, California, et cetera. And building a transmission line in the U.S. today just takes a really long time. We've been involved with several, one of which took over 20 years, one of which took 15 years. We were talking about the load growth of data centers in a 10-year window here. That taking 20 years to build a transmission line is just not going to be realistic to meet the need. Is
it just the complexity that we're at now? Because I imagine in the 30s and 40s, there was nothing, there weren't a lot of people to protest these lines being run across the country, and the need was obvious.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think it's a combination of regulatory hurdles, policy changes with state governments. It's different in every state, and even within certain states, there's differences in different counties. And then there's landowners. You're building a power plant. Generally, you can buy 100 acres or 50 acres of land, and it's yours. When you're running a several 100-mile transmission line, you're not going to buy all the land, number one. And number two, you have to get permission from each of those landowners to have a project that's in the middle of their pasture, for example, for 50 years with a transmission tower.
Right.
Some folks see it as an additional revenue source and they're grateful for it. But others are like, not on my land. My grandfather's grandfather had this property, and I don't want to change it.
The NIMBYs.
Yes, exactly.
NIMBYs. And not to make it, too political, but of course there's always concern related to emissions, CO2, these types of things. The reality at this point in time is even if the U.S. gets to zero, the majority of emissions are coming out of Asia. And yeah, I guess I wonder, what does the future look like there? I mean, we have limited control over how other countries run.
Sure.
And I think there's an argument being made that we were able to industrialize off of cheap, fuel sources like coal, like natural gas. Shouldn't these other developing countries have the same opportunity? So there's a lot of different elements at play that it just isn't, it's not as simple as let's just shut down this plant and it's all fixed.
Right.
There's the industrial processes that make up a large amount of the emissions, and those are very difficult to control.
They are, yeah.
And so, I mean, I know that it's often sort of condensed into this renewables good, conventional bad, but it's really a much more nuanced picture than that.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's interesting, particularly in China, where they have been a developing economy for 50 years, let's call it. They're building more coal plants than the rest of the world combined, but they're also building more solar and transmission than the rest of the world combined.
Yep.
And so they're building, they've basically embraced the all of the above strategy. They're building everything. They're building more nuclear than anybody else. They don't have the abundance of natural resources that we have, so they're not really building that much gas.
Right.
Or the gas they're building, they're actually firing it on liquid fuel like diesel. And so it is an interesting conundrum. But as I mentioned, I think our approach in North America and particularly in the U.S. needs to be, hey, we just need more power right now, and so we can add emissions controls on the back end, which is what we've been doing for decades.
Right.
And that's probably worthwhile.
The reality in my mind, it seems like carbon capture is going to be a huge part of the future. Maybe something that doesn't get as much attention.
Yeah.
And will require a lot of energy. And maybe it's not until we have commercial fusion that becomes viable.
Sure. Yeah. Commercial fusion would make all these other sources of energy moot. I mean, you just wouldn't need anything else if we can commercialize that.
They pull the primary ingredients they need from seawater, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so it's the most abundant resource on the planet.
Yes.
I mean, we have more ocean than anything else.
Yes.
And I think a single glass could power a city.
Yeah, something like that.
So
yeah.
You're creating a small star.
Yeah.
That we're essentially, and they've, a few years ago showed the proof of concept that they can get there.
Yeah.
Although it's, the joke is it's always 30 years away.
Exactly.
It seems like it's probably closer to 10, 15, maybe to something commercial.
Yep. The proof of concept, it worked to create power, but it took more power to create that power than we got out of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's two places up here just north of Seattle and Everett, two different companies. One's backed by Bill Gates, and I can't remember who the other's backed by. That, it seems promising, and I'm very hopeful. It's just even if it's 10 years out, we got a lot of work to do before we get there.
Yeah. And, right now it's in the billions of dollars of funding.
Yep.
I imagine when there's a little more proof, when they can create a small generating station, that then a lot of, that private equity will flood into it.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think the moral of the story at this point is there's a lot of possibilities in the future.
Yep.
And it seems like the current need is the top of mind, the thing that's the most pressing.
Yep.
And, that's human history, it seems like. And that's the history of the grid, is solving problems as they come up.
Yep.
So,
and the current problem is this load demand.
Needing
been
more
flat
energy
for 30 years ish, and now all of a sudden it's just growing like crazy.
Yeah. And seeing some of these new innovations with, these AI platforms and LLMs and, Claude and, ChatGPT.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And we don't necessarily know how things will shake out in the next 5 years. So it seems like there's a lot of unknowns right now. It seems like the thing that people are trusting in right now is to invest their money in the companies that are, on the forefront of the technology. But even looking at a company like DeepSeek and, late 2024, 2025, they showed that they were able to train their model for much less,
Right.
money, much less energy.
Yeah. Much
And
less
so-
compute power. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so the question is, how much energy are we going to need? It's hard to say,
Right.
Well,
Well, now that the chatbots are talking to each other, how much power is that going to use over time? I
Yeah.
mean, it's really hard to know.
And-
But then maybe they'll solve our fusion problem.
maybe, yeah, maybe they will.
Just have them talk to each other. Solve that
we need to get somebody in here that is on the ground floor working on, that cutting edge
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
So, yeah, I hopefully, for the listeners, this has given them a little bit of an overview of where we're at, where we've come from.
Yep.
It's a complicated story.
It is.
It's not as simple as, headlines tend to make it out to be.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that NACE is in an interesting position. We don't own any of these assets. We're able to go where the industry leads us. And so I think that we have a unique voice in that, is trying to see the forest from the trees a little bit. And, So Alan, thanks for all your expertise and thoughts.
No problem.
I think there's a lot more to talk about, but I think hopefully this hasn't been too much information, but I feel like we've given a pretty good rundown from really inception to modern day.
Yep. And I like your analysis that, hey, it seems like every step along the way here has been an adjustment to a problem. And the problem right now is different than it has been. So we will adjust as an industry. We will adjust.
Yeah. And it's not something we could have predicted 5-10 years ago.
Exactly.
And who knows where we'll be in 5 years.
Yeah.
So, looking forward to the ride.
Absolutely.
I think we'll figure it out. I think
we will. We will.
Humans are pretty
confidence.
resilient.
Yes.
So, but yeah, appreciate your time.
Absolutely.